The morning heat pressed down on Tokyo like a suffocating blanket. August 6, 1945, had arrived with the same oppressive humidity that marked every summer day in wartime Japan. Deep beneath the imperial palace, 90 feet of concrete and steel separated the war room from the world above. 4 feet of reinforced walls surrounded the men who believed they understood their enemy. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong. And at precisely 8:15 that morning, a single message would shatter everything they thought they knew about the war they were losing. The basement command center hummed with familiar sounds: typewriters clacking, radio static crackling, the steady murmur of officers managing defeat with quiet efficiency. Field Marshal Shinroku Hata prepared for another morning briefing about retreating positions and dwindling supplies. Then Lieutenant Colonel Takashi Yamamoto burst through the steel door. No customary bow, no formal announcement, just a man carrying papers that would change history. His hands shook slightly as he held the decoded transmission. The message had come from Hiroshima Regional Military Command. What it said would force Japan's leaders to confront a truth they had spent 4 years denying. America had been holding back. The transmission was brief, fragments of text interrupted by static and terror. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. The words seemed impossible. Blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment. Military minds struggled to process the implications. Unknown weapon type, casualties catastrophic. Then silence, forever. General Yoshijiro Umezu read the message once, twice, 3 times. His first thought was logical. Massive conventional bombing, maybe 500 B-29s hitting simultaneously. The mathematics had to work somehow. Hiroshima sprawled across 27 square miles. 350,000 people lived there. One bomb couldn't destroy all of that. Could it? Additional reports trickled in throughout the morning. Each one made less sense than the last. Weather reconnaissance had spotted only 3 American bombers over Hiroshima. 3 aircraft. Not 300. Not 30. 3. Admiral Soemu Toyoda stood before the massive wall map. Red pins marked every known American position in the Pacific. His intelligence staff had become experts at predicting enemy movements. They knew bomber formations, typical bomb loads, expected damage patterns. Nothing in 3 years of war suggested 3 planes could erase a city. By 10 o'clock, reconnaissance pilots reported something unprecedented. A mushroom cloud rising 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away. Colors that defied description. Purples and oranges that seemed to pulse with inner fire. The railway official arrived at 11:30. His testimony would be recorded word for word. 15 miles outside Hiroshima when it happened. A flash brighter than 1,000 suns, pressure waves that derailed trains. The entire city center had simply vanished, replaced by a firestorm that lit the mountains. At 2 o'clock, the Supreme War Council gathered in complete silence. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki had survived multiple assassination attempts. His crime was suggesting peace negotiations might be necessary. Now he held reports that made peace seem like survival. His hands trembled as he placed the documents on the polished table. "Gentlemen," he began, "we must consider what this means." General Korichika Anami spoke first. The war minister had advocated fighting until every Japanese citizen lay dead. "American propaganda," he declared. "They want us to believe they possess weapons they do not have. Hiroshima was destroyed by conventional bombing. They are using deception about 3 aircraft." Admiral Toyoda interrupted, something he would never have done in normal circumstances. "3 aircraft, Anami-san. Our radar tracked them. Our observers watched them." 3. Silence fell like ash from a volcano. For 3 years, Japanese military doctrine had rested on one fundamental assumption: American industrial might could be overcome by Japanese spiritual strength. Americans could build more ships, more planes, more tanks. But Japanese forces would fight with such ferocity that American casualties would become politically unbearable. This calculation had guided every decision since Pearl Harbor. When American factories produced 300,000 aircraft, Japan's leaders consoled themselves that Japanese pilots would fight with 10 times the spirit. When American shipyards launched cargo vessels faster than German submarines could sink them, Japan insisted that American sailors lacked the warrior's heart. But a single bomb that could destroy a city suggested something far more disturbing. It suggested that American scientific capacity had reached levels that made Japanese resistance meaningless. It suggested that America had been developing secret weapons while simultaneously fighting across 2 oceans. It suggested that everything Japan believed about modern warfare was obsolete. Intelligence officer Colonel Hideaki Sato presented his afternoon analysis at 4 o'clock. His team had been calculating American industrial capacity since 1941. Their numbers had been consistently accurate and consistently terrifying. America had produced 88,410 tanks during the war. Japan had built 6,450. America had constructed 41 aircraft carriers. Japan had managed 15. American cargo ship production exceeded German sinking rates. But Sato's new calculations suggested something that broke their understanding entirely. "If," he whispered, "the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they possess scientific capabilities that render numerical comparisons meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting." Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo voiced what everyone was thinking, what no one wanted to say. "And if they have one such bomb, we must assume they have more." The Japanese understanding of American power had been shaped by carefully constructed beliefs. These beliefs would all collapse within days. But first, one must understand what they had convinced themselves was true. November 1941. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had provided the most accurate assessment any Japanese leader would offer. "I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the 2nd or 3rd year." Yamamoto had lived in America, studied at Harvard, served as naval attaché in Washington, toured American factories, witnessed the industrial infrastructure firsthand. His calculations were mathematical, not wishful thinking. American steel production alone exceeded Japan's total industrial output. American petroleum reserves were effectively unlimited. Japan depended entirely on imports that enemies could cut off. But Yamamoto's warnings were systematically ignored. The very staff now contemplating Hiroshima's destruction had dismissed his assessments. Army strategic planning documents from 1941 revealed the alternative narrative military leadership had embraced. American industrial might would be neutralized by 3 factors. Distance would be the first. Japan's conquests would secure a defensive perimeter so vast that American logistics would collapse. Every ship, every aircraft, every bullet would travel 5,000 miles across hostile ocean. Japan could sustain forces from conquered territories while America exhausted itself in futile supply chains. Morale would be the second factor. American society was soft, individualistic, incapable of sustaining heavy casualties. Military doctrine assumed that after losing 30 to 40,000 men, American public opinion would demand peace. Japanese willingness to die would outlast American willingness to fight. Tactical superiority would be the third factor. Japanese forces, through superior training, warrior spirit, and tactical innovation, would inflict casualty ratios that made American numerical advantages irrelevant. One Japanese soldier would equal 3 or 4 Americans in combat effectiveness. These assumptions had been tested and found wanting at every engagement. Yet High Command had consistently reinterpreted defeats as validation of their theories. Minor adjustments rather than fundamental revision. Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official assessment blamed bad luck and tactical errors, not American cryptographic superiority, not the fundamental vulnerability of Japan's carrier-focused strategy. The underlying assumption that Japanese forces could overcome numerical disadvantages remained intact. Guadalcanal, from August 1942 to February 1943. Japanese forces discovered that Americans could sustain logistics across vast distances, could match Japanese soldiers in jungle warfare. The official assessment blamed local commanders for insufficient fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the strategic situation. The underlying assumption that American society would crack under sustained casualties remained intact. By August 1945, every major assumption had been systematically demolished by reality. Senior leadership had never formally acknowledged this. General Anami's continued advocacy for fighting to the last citizen represented the logical endpoint of beliefs that had never been questioned. The afternoon of August the 6th marked the first time Japan's Supreme War Council confronted their illusions directly. Intelligence Colonel Sato presented what he called the reality assessment, a document his team had compiled over 6 months, a document they had been prevented from presenting until now. The numbers were devastating. American aircraft production in 1944 alone exceeded Japan's total production for the entire war. American shipyards built escort carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. American ammunition factories produced more shells in a week than Japan's factories managed in a month. But Sato's most damning statistics involved scientific research. His intelligence network had documented American research facilities employing over 130,000 scientists and engineers. Military technology development on an unprecedented scale. Japan's comparable effort employed approximately 6,000 people. American research universities had larger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago. Individual institutions possessed more capability than Japan's national effort. The atomic bomb, Sato explained carefully, required facilities we could not have built even if we had known how. The Americans constructed entire cities in secret. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. These facilities consumed more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on its entire war effort in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would echo through war crimes trials and historical analysis. How could we not know? Sato's answer was uncomfortable but accurate. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial expansion continuously. We intercepted communications about large-scale secret projects. We documented their scientific recruitment efforts, but every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know because knowing would require acknowledging that we could not win. Admiral Toyota added his own bitter assessment. The Americans, he said slowly, fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan simultaneously while developing weapons we cannot comprehend. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible, while maintaining civilian economies at levels exceeding peacetime production. They are not merely stronger than us. They are operating on a different level of civilization. This admission marked the fundamental shift. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had portrayed Americans as materialistic and weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb revealed this narrative as catastrophically wrong. The psychological impact extended beyond military calculation. Cabinet Secretary Hisatsune Sakomizu recorded in his diary that evening, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society functioned as ours functioned, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind." August 7, 1945 began with confirmation that made Hiroshima seem even more incomprehensible. Reconnaissance aircraft finally penetrated the radiation zone. They transmitted photographs that circulated among high command within hours. Major Tsuneo Kitamura piloted the first successful reconnaissance mission. He reported weather conditions unlike anything he had encountered. Updrafts so powerful they threw his aircraft 2,000 feet higher in seconds. Air temperatures that spiked his instruments beyond their limits. Visibility obscured by smoke rising in columns to the stratosphere. The photographs developed by 11 o'clock showed something military analysts initially refused to believe. The city center had been completely flattened. Not destroyed in the conventional sense, where rubble and foundations remained. Flattened to bare earth. Structures had been vaporized. Everything within a mile of the blast center had ceased to exist in recognizable form. Intelligence analysts compared these images to conventional bombing results. The most devastating raid of the war had been the Tokyo firebombing of March 9–10, 1945. That attack required 334 B-29 bombers, dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries over 3 hours. Hiroshima's destruction exceeded that raid's devastation, accomplished by a single bomb from a single aircraft in a single instant. The Supreme War Council reconvened at 2 o'clock on August 7th, with intelligence that fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had summoned Japanese Ambassador Naotake Sato to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was brief. The Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan effective August 9, 1945. This announcement shattered Japan's final strategic hope. For months, Japanese diplomacy had worked desperately to negotiate Soviet mediation for peace terms. The fantasy was that Stalin, never fully trusted by American and British allies, might broker an arrangement preserving some Japanese territory and preventing occupation. Soviet entry eliminated this possibility completely. General Anami's face went pale as implications registered. Japan now faced enemies on all fronts, with no prospect of negotiated settlement. American atomic weapons from the east. Soviet armies from the north. British Commonwealth forces from the south. Chinese resistance continuing in occupied territories. The empire that had stretched from India's borders to the mid-Pacific was being compressed back toward the home islands with crushing force. Foreign Minister Togo presented the stark reality. We have 3 choices: surrender unconditionally, fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons, or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan ceases to exist as a nation. There are no other options. August 8th brought fragmentary intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army had launched a massive assault into Manchuria with overwhelming force. The Kwantung Army, once the elite formation of Japanese military power, was being systematically destroyed. Soviet tank columns advanced 50 miles in the first day. They encountered resistance that collapsed before forces that had learned their trade destroying Nazi Germany. The Manchurian operation demonstrated another uncomfortable truth about American power. The Soviets were equipped with thousands of American vehicles, trucks, and communications equipment provided through Lend-Lease. American industrial capacity had not only sustained its own forces across 2 oceans, but had also equipped allies on a scale that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. A single American program, Lend-Lease, had provided more material to Soviet forces than Japan's entire industrial output for the war. At 11:02 hours on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The communication from Nagasaki Regional Command was even briefer than Hiroshima's. Second atomic attack, city destroyed, casualties catastrophic. Then silence. The Supreme War Council emergency session that afternoon descended into something unprecedented in Japanese military protocol: open acknowledgement of complete strategic failure. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai spoke with remarkable candor. The Americans have demonstrated that they can destroy our cities at will, one by one, until nothing remains. They have demonstrated the capability to continue this indefinitely. We cannot defend against weapons we cannot detect until they detonate. Our anti-aircraft systems are irrelevant. Our fighter aircraft cannot intercept what they cannot find. Our civil defense preparations are meaningless. Army Chief of Staff General Umezu added his own assessment. Words that would have been considered defeatist heresy weeks earlier. The atomic bomb changes fundamental military calculations. Concentrated forces become targets. Cities become targets. Our strategy of fighting to the last citizen assumes Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without invasion, our entire defensive doctrine becomes obsolete. They can simply eliminate Japan from existence without ever setting foot on our soil. Intelligence estimates presented that evening calculated that America likely possessed between 3 and 7 additional atomic bombs. Production capacity existed for more. Even if estimates were high, even if America possessed only 1 more weapon, the strategic implication remained identical. Continued resistance was suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakomizu recorded the Emperor's private comments from an audience that evening. His Majesty expressed that the unendurable must be endured. The atomic bombs had demonstrated that continued resistance would result in complete annihilation of the Japanese people. Terms must be accepted that preserved the nation even if those terms were painful beyond measure. The phrase, "the unendurable must be endured," would become the foundation for Japan's surrender announcement. But the path from private imperial acknowledgement to actual surrender would require navigating military opposition that remained fierce despite overwhelming evidence. August 10th brought the formal Japanese surrender offer transmitted through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message was conditional. Japan would accept Potsdam Declaration terms provided the Emperor's sovereignty was maintained. The American response delivered August 12th was deliberately ambiguous. The Emperor would be subject to the Supreme Commander of Allied powers. His ultimate status would be determined by the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. This ambiguity created the final crisis. Military hardliners led by General Anami interpreted this as unacceptable. They argued for continuing resistance despite atomic weapons. Their position was no longer based on victory prospects, but on preserving national honor through destruction rather than accepting occupation and foreign judgment. The surrender formalities extended through late August and early September 1945, but the psychological transformation of Japanese high command was complete by August 10th. What followed was not merely military defeat, but comprehensive re-evaluation of everything Japanese leadership had believed about modern warfare, industrial capacity, and their own place in the global order. The formal surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri on September 1745 brought Japanese representatives face to face with the physical manifestation of American power they had consistently underestimated. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed the surrender document. He recorded his impressions in his diary. The harbor was filled with American warships as far as one could see. Hundreds of vessels. Aircraft filled the sky in formations that blocked the sun. The Americans displayed their power not through threats, but through simple presence. This armada represented a fraction of their total military force, yet exceeded everything Japan possessed at the peak of our strength. General Yoshijiro Umezu represented the Imperial General Staff. He noted the ceremony's location was itself a lesson in American capability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American yards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was one of dozens of capital ships they constructed while simultaneously fighting across 2 oceans and developing atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. The American occupation force began arriving in late August. Japanese military observers documented details that reinforced their new understanding. The equipment, organization, and logistics demonstrated capabilities that previous intelligence reports had accurately described, but High Command had refused to credit. A single American infantry division moved with more trucks than the entire Imperial Army possessed. American supply operations delivered fresh food to troops, while Japanese forces had been starving. American medical facilities treated injuries that Japanese military medicine considered untreatable. Intelligence Colonel Sato compiled his final report in September 1945, titled, "Why We Lost." The assessment provided brutal honesty. We lost the war in December 1941 when we attacked an enemy we did not understand. Every battle thereafter was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific establishment was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was effectively unlimited, while ours depended on conquests we could not sustain. We fought, believing spirit could overcome material. We were wrong. The American Occupation Administration, led by General Douglas MacArthur, provided Japanese officials with access to information about American war production. The numbers confirmed their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17 million rifles, 41 billion rounds of ammunition. More staggering, they accomplished this while maintaining civilian living standards that exceeded Japanese peacetime prosperity. Former Prime Minister Suzuki articulated what Japanese leadership had finally grasped. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could simultaneously sustain mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in quantities we found incomprehensible. The Manhattan Project details gradually revealed through occupation channels provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people, cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire 1944 military budget. It required constructing facilities that consumed more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists hadn't imagined possible. The atomic bomb wasn't merely a weapon. It was evidence of scientific and industrial capacity that placed America in a different category of civilization. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. "We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disunited. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation. Diversity provided talent. Wealth funded capabilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not merely wrong, but precisely backwards." The psychological impact on military leadership manifested in various ways. Some, like General Anami, chose death rather than living with the reality of how badly they had miscalculated. Others, like Admiral Yonai, became advocates for complete demilitarization. They argued that Japan's militaristic culture had led to catastrophic strategic blindness. Most simply struggled to reconcile the warriors they believed themselves to be with the reality that they had led their nation into an unwinnable war through systematic self-deception. Japanese historians working under occupation supervision began documenting how thoroughly intelligence reports had been ignored. Accurate assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American scientific capabilities had been suppressed as harmful to morale. Evidence that Japan was losing the war had been reinterpreted as temporary setbacks requiring more fighting spirit. The entire command structure had created an information environment where truth became treason and optimism became policy. The final lesson Japanese high command absorbed was perhaps the bitterest. American power had not been fully deployed. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while maintaining substantial forces in reserve, developing next-generation weapons, preparing for conflicts that might follow. The atomic bombs represented not America's maximum effort, but what they could accomplish while simultaneously doing a dozen other things. Japanese forces had fought with total commitment of every resource. American forces had fought with comfortable margins everywhere. By 1947, when American occupation officials conducted comprehensive interviews with former Japanese military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Umezu's testimony summarized what Japanese high command had finally understood. "We lost because we never understood our enemy. We attributed to them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, inflexible thinking, when they possessed the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The atomic bomb was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly comprehended." The heat of that August morning in 1945 had brought more than weather. It had brought revelation. The men in the basement bunker beneath Tokyo had finally learned what their intelligence officers had been trying to tell them for 4 years. They were not fighting an enemy they could defeat. They were fighting an enemy they had never understood. An enemy who had been holding back. An enemy whose true power exceeded their most pessimistic calculations. The atomic bomb hadn't caused their defeat. It had simply revealed how completely they had already lost, how thoroughly they had misjudged the nature of the war they were fighting, how catastrophically wrong they had been about everything that mattered. "We learned too late," General Umezu would write, "that courage cannot defeat chemistry. Spirit cannot overcome steel. Determination means nothing when facing an enemy who possesses both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form." The war was over. Japan's illusions about American power were finally, brutally, completely shattered. The truth had arrived at 8:15 on an August morning. Everything that followed was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics.